everybody. Welcome to the first meeting back in person. How are you? I'm Mark. We've probably all spoken through the Zoom screen, but okay. Can we do White, please, first?
No opening remarks in the first meeting?
None. Business as usual. It's as though nothing happened. Let's go back a year and a month.
You get the wine and cheese that I thought you were.
Well, you got this.
Or I missed it.
Yeah, I think, can you maybe bring it around over here? Yeah, I don't know about the camera. We can't see it at all from here, so. Thanks.
Do you need me on mic for the camera?
Yeah, if you bring the mic, you can pick it up the stand.
So I'm Nick Booter, I'm the landscape architect on the project. This is Sharr and Evelyn White, and Jason, I think you probably know, who's with Beatty and Watson. We were before you last month or the month before with a virtual presentation, and then we've made some major revisions to the plan based on the comments you had after your site visit. So I just wanted to walk you through that. The concept, as you know, there's a wetland on the site and also a lake to the east of the house. And the earlier version of the plan we had a wetland buffer intrusion, not in the wetland, but in the buffers for each. And we had the pool in this area, and that didn't seem to be very popular with your board. So we listened to what you said, and we've taken the pool and rotated it and tucked it up against the side of the house now. So now we have a terrace with a set of stairs. We can get onto this terrace directly from the house. We don't need a bigger area. We can get a relatively modest sized terrace and a swimming pool and a fairly tight grading area to get it in, keeping a fence line right up close to the perimeter of the pool. Stormwater infiltration area, so all of the runoff generated by the patio can be captured and infiltrated into the ground. And then the green shows a fairly extensive buffer area restoration. So we have a little bit over 10,000 square feet of buffer enhancement now, which is primarily located along the wetland because that's the drainage catchment that we're in. So what we'd like to do here, as you know from your site visit, the site is fairly steep in some spots, and it's an extensive amount of lawn right down to the edge of the wetland and also to the edge of the pond. So the strategy here is to take out a significant amount of that grass. And also, as you may recall, on the southern edge of this wetland, there is a strip that's unvegetated. So the whites have been cleaning out some of the invasive species over time. They have the sort of the trifecta. They have multiflora rose, they have bittersweet, they have garlic mustard, they have Euonymus elatus, all that kind of standard invasive that you would expect to see on the edge of a buffer. And they've been clearing that out. We're going to continue that clearing process of pulling the vegetation out manually. I think is probably the way to go here rather than with a herbicide. And we have a fairly extensive palette of all native plants. We've modified the planting plan a little bit from one of the earlier versions we had. These two areas on the steep slope going down to the lake were more of an ornamental type plant palette. So now we've switched that over, and we have all native plants. There's hundreds. And of course, you always have to balance. You want wildlife habitat, but you don't want deer food. So you want buffer or pollinator habitat and things for animals to live and nest in, but not necessarily things that the deer are going to eat. So that's always a bit of a challenge, as you know, with the populations of deer that we have at the rates that we have. So the value of this planting is somewhere upwards of $70,000. That is based on my experience growing up in the nursery industry and then working in this profession for the last 30 years, based on a reasonable multiplier for wholesale prices. It's a fair amount of handwork because of the location that it's in, and the idea is that we'll grub out the grass and install these plantings to reintroduce a buffer where there's currently a lawn area. And I believe Sharr's put together a package showing you he's got some imagery in there of the existing conditions and some of the different iterations that we've looked at. We had, as you know, we earlier had a pool that was proposed on the west side of the house, but that was based on, that was done actually before we had an actual delineation of the boundary. And in fact, the wetland buffer is much farther than we anticipated in that, even in that early scenario. So that scenario here would still have been partially within this buffer for the forested and shrub wetland on the north of the building.
The boundary, I can't see it. Can you
Okay,
kind of
so-
run your finger around it?
So the wetland boundary is this line here, comes up like that. There's this little inlet that comes underneath the driveway here, and it goes out here through a channel and then joins with the ponds, I guess somewhere over here. And the lake boundary, this contour line is the base of the slope where the pond begins. And the buffer for the pond comes up into here, and eclipse, the house is actually in the buffer. But is it, I mean, when was the house built? It's 100-something years old? 1980 was the house? The old part, the log cabin part?
Log cabin.
Okay,
And then we put an addition on it, 3 years.
right, okay. And then the buffer for the wetland itself is actually here, and it also clips the house, and it cuts, it goes here, and it cuts over that way.
Right, it was taken off the map, correct?
I'm-
That section of the wetland.
That was
buffer-
based on your delineation, right, so that was the survey.
What I'm saying
flag-
is that mark is taken off, it was on the original proposal, that line where you were
This one.
struggling to show where it continued to cross. It actually was about where your finger went, but it's not on this plan. Not that it makes any difference, I'm just pointing out that I couldn't find it.
Actually, I don't see it on this plan, I guess because it joins with that one, maybe? Is it on
I
there?
didn't, could you show it? I couldn't see it, I apologize.
Is it on yours, Jason?
Because there were two different circles essentially, and they,
This buffer here.
Right, and then this one, but where does this one, I see what your question is, where does it continue this way? And it seems to stop where it intersects this other buffer. Oh, because it's this, that's why, because that's the buffer.
If we go to this,
So it's
this,
here.
this is, I have the map here with everything taken off.
Okay.
there it is.
Right, so I think what they've done graphically is it actually joined the two where they intersect, so the buffer is actually kind of this heart shape.
Right. But in the original map, there were two separate buffers actually shown contiguous, because the pond has a buffer that actually crosses over into the buffer of the lake.
Right,
So there was a section where the pool was, it was actually encroaching on both buffers.
that's correct.
So what we've now done is we've taken it out of the lake buffer completely.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
And the pool itself is completely inside the buffer of the pond, the wetland. whatever
Right,
you
it's
call it.
completely out of the other buffer. It's
Right.
out of the pond buffer, but it's in the buffer of the,
The entire pool,
yes,
right.
that's correct.
So that line is still on there. Just the lake buffer is still.
Is still on there,
it's
yes.
still- it should be-
That I saw, that is correct, it's still on there.
Yeah,
The lake buffer,
buffer's here.
right.
If that, is that your question?
The question was, there was a
Yeah.
line on the previous iteration that came down and across that showed the buffer from the wetland.
Okay,
And it was close to the pond, so it did one of these.
right, yeah, it was an overlap, there are two
Right,
buffers
right.
through
I was
here.
just noting that it's gone, and
Yeah.
it didn't.
Right,
it
and
made it a
the
little confusing, that's all.
previous version of this was in that overlap, actually,
Right.
yeah. I thought it was a good idea to kind of get it as far as possible from both, but I guess you didn't agree with that, so we moved.
Right. When we were on site, there was sort of two possibilities. The perfect plan would have been to put it in front of the house, where it's shown on this older version, but there's a septic and everything in the front.
Right, there's
You
a
guys are-
septic in here, and then we have a yard setback to here.
Yep.
So we have essentially,
Right.
it's really, and there's utilities in there as
Right.
well.
So we understood that there was going to be a
Right.
compromise at some point. So, okay, please continue. In terms of, I noticed in your letter, there's essentially a 2-to-1 ratio of.
Yeah, a little bit better. And that actually does, so that's 2-to-1 of the wetland planting. So I took the work area, the disturbed area, and we didn't give ourselves credit for the lawn that we're restoring, because, you know, we're gonna, obviously, we're gonna dig this up, we're not gonna leave it, that's gonna get grass, but I didn't count that section in there, which is probably another 1,000 square feet. But in true wetland buffer restoration, that is a 2-to-1 for the actual temporary disturbance from construction. But the actual permanent disturbance, you know, this is gonna be grassed. So the permanent disturbance is the pool and the terrace and the pool equipment, which is here. So that was,
Right.
did we say 1,200 square feet or so, give or take? So 1,200 square feet of permanent disturbance and 10,000 plus of permanent restoration.
In that area between the, I guess, what's north on that? The
North
top?
is straight up.
So to the north side of the pool, that's lawn now. It'll be, what will be happening to that small area to?
This
No,
area is
that-
actually.
Right next to the pool, right next to that.
So this
that.
is gonna stay lawn from the edge of the water of the pool. There's and we're not doing a walkway on that side of the pool, we're just having a coping up to the grass. So, and then we have a fence that's in the red line, and so this from here to this line is grass, and then right now, the lawn edge is actually farther down, and then this section in here is devoid of vegetation largely. So we're pulling the lawn edge back, we're cutting out the lawn and adding this buffer planting.
So how far back are we from the corner, that closest corner of the pool now from the actual wetland?
I'd have to put a scale on there. I can ballpark it for you.
I mean, I'm thinking really in terms of a construction narrative, you know, what's going to be happening in that zone. The pool is obviously, what kind of a pool is it? Can I ask that? Is it gunite pool or fiberglass
Gunite.
pool?
Oh, actually, it's sailing pool, but we're doing a typical gunite pool, yeah.
So dig a big hole,
Right,
reinforcing bars and so on, and then shoot the concrete.
right.
So the area between the pool and, in that area that we're talking about, in that little zone of grass, disturbed heavily while the construction is going on?
Well, I think that's something to work out with you, actually. I mean, my sense was that we need to get the material out through here. And that was the other thing, we had we had the construction access way coming through here for the first version, which,
Right.
you know, there was kind of not a great other way to get there to build that. But now with this here, we can actually, and I looked at this, and it's, you know, some smaller birch trees that they've planted, but we can get a machine through here without a whole lot of disturbance to the construction site. And what I would suggest is we do a staging area, we do a soil stockpile here, so they can dig out of this and swing and drop here and then load trucks out. So that's almost entirely out of the buffer. And then what I would say is we would have a demarcation at the limit of grading here and not allow anything past that. That's how we would typically do a project like this. We would, you know, have a silt fence and double it with construction fence, actually.
Yep.
So unless, that's sort of standard practice for us, we double it up. You know, the silt fence doesn't stop everybody, so we put the orange mesh fence there as well and keep people out. But the nice thing is we can stage a lot of our stuff here and off the driveway, so they can bring the steel in, and the gunite rig can come in from this side as well.
Right.
And then the water truck, actually the water truck will probably just leave it in the driveway and put a hose in. That's how they like to work.
Okay.
They can go pretty far away.
You guys have any questions, or? I'm sure we do.
Yeah, I do. Just for your own point, I had measured this before. Basically, the pool at its closest point is roughly about 53 feet from the wetland itself, and the area of disturbance is somewhere about 34, 35. My comments are, the first is probably the simplest. On Sharr, which you put together on page 3, what does this coloring represent, or is this just from a steep slopes analysis?
That's the slope map.
Okay, so that's minutia. So I am concerned that the elevation of the pool is above the wetland. So it puts into place several prongs. One is, how do we make sure in heavy rains the pool does not overflow into the wetland?
Good question.
I think that's very important. And I think it also begets to use some form of non-chlorinated system so that a catastrophic situation.
Salt or
We've
ozone?
been planning for not going in for sure. The whole time. Yeah.
So you have a salt system,
We'll do this all.
okay.
No matter where.
So
But even
the
a
over-
salt system, you don't want going into that well.
Right,
So
right,
it
and
would be
actually-
nice to have alternative drainage or an emergency drain
Right.
of some sort.
And actually, most communities that we work in now do not allow you to discharge for drawdown in the winter when you usually drop the pool. The old way to do it, you just pump out the pool and let it rip. And now what most places want, and I would assume you're the same, is that would go into an infiltration system. And the way that they plumb these is with the automatic covers, or even without automatic cover, there's an overflow drain because eventually the pool will overflow. And that goes, we typically run that into an infiltration system.
Is that a
Because
separate one from the one that you were talking about before?
We've done it both ways. How would you prefer? You want a separate Coltech system for the drawdowns versus the, I mean-
It should all drain out theoretically within 2 days anyways by design, so
Yeah.
I don't think it's
So-
all the same.
and so that's a good question. So I would actually say that if we're capturing, the pool, even though it's water, is considered an impervious surface because the bottom's made out of concrete. So we would capture runoff, whatever your design storm is, and take that runoff and infiltrate that. So I would say that the overflow, since we're not going to put a catch basin in, the overflow functions essentially as, it's ostensibly a catch basin for the water part, and that would go into the infiltration system. And then the drawdown we would normally do that into the same thing.
Okay, that makes sense. And my other comment, it's sort of twofold, is there needs to be some agreement to be able to upkeep particularly the investment
Right,
in the vegetation that's being put in, as well as, even though I'm not an expert, but I know a decent amount about gardening and native plants. Yes, a lot of this is pretty much deer resistant, but
Pretty much.
deer are curious
Pretty much.
once something new
Right.
happens. So I would suggest, unfortunately, for a year or two, temporarily fencing as much as possible with plastic fencing.
We would love not to lose. that
Because you
much
could lose,
money.
you could lose a lot. I guess, the other alternative is spraying it with a deer
Yeah.
repellent, but.
yeah, there are a couple plants on this list. I mean, there were 3 or 4 plants that deer don't eat, but frankly, a lot of them are they're all non-native. And the native plants they go after. So we have pretty good luck with things like the fern, and we've got shad. We have pretty good luck with shad. They will go after milkweed on occasion. They will go after asters on occasion. They tend to leave the birch alone, although you have to worry about the buck scraping. Clethra, we have good luck with clethra. Red twig dogwood, they will definitely nibble on occasion. Witch hazel, we have good luck. Ilex glabra, it depends on the taste of the deer. So there's a bit of a.
So I mean, as my suggestion, and Lou, you could weigh in,
Yeah.
is, for the first year or two, just as little post as possible, stringing, the cheap
Yeah.
deer fencing.
One of the other things that I've noticed also is when you bring deer are smart animals. You bring a plant in from a nursery where it's getting liquid fertilizer every week.
Right.
They know that's a nutritious plant. You let it sit there for a little while and it kind of stabilizes and becomes more like the native plants. I find that they don't eat them as much. But they're, I work from Maine to Battery Park, and there are deer almost throughout the entire spectrum. And they have different tastes depending where you are. And Cold Spring and Philipstown are really high on the browse problem, really high. One of the worst communities I work in. So I think fencing is a smart move.
Can I add I just wanted to go back to Andy's question about the dry wells. I'm just curious what you guys use for the storm period. Chase, was it a 100-year storm? For the calculations for the amount of volume, for the volume of water?
Well, it depends on what we're dealing with, but typically it's.
I think Westchester County, Best Management, they make us do, I think
50 or
they're,
25 year, I think.
I think they upped it a little bit now.
Okay.
But, you know, in all fairness, or in reality, obviously, we know storms are coming much more frequently, so clearly a larger system, it's, my opinion, from having built them, increasing the size of the system is not that expensive. Building it at all in the first place is expensive, but expanding it a little bit is not that bad. So I would suggest we ask for a big enough system, for sure, to carry all the primary runoff. The pool, feels to me, should be a separate, isolated thing that's never getting water in it, except for when there's an emergency and the pool water's got to go into it, which is chlorinated, thus being, you're containing, it's still chlorinated, even though it's a salt pool, that's.
Right.
But, so it seems to me like it'd be better to keep the contaminated water separate and have a reserve for it
Yep.
always, no matter what.
Yep, that's my feeling.
So we typically do a 6-inch drawdown for a pool for winter, so that'd be typical. And I think the other thing that we could talk about is, you know, the chlorine, you're right, I mean, salt generator is just generating sodium and chloride.
Sodium chloride,
So, but at a much lower rate than the pellet stuff.
Right.
What another good practice would be is to let the pool sit for a while and let that I just off-gas the term, but let that chlorine, whatever volume of chlorine is in there, let that dissipate before it's pumped out.
Right, that certainly addresses the drawdown, but I'm curious, how much water do you think actually went into the pool in this last storm over the past few days? You know, so that's the kind of event I'm thinking you're sort of one, that's the reserve system, in case this
Yeah.
thing, and you have to pump it down because it's about to overflow and run down into
Right.
the lake.
Right.
Yeah, the
I would
storm
think it's-
that we had, what was it, a week ago Friday or something?
4 inches,
Right, I calculated, we had 4 inches,
4
and
inches.
about 3 inches of it, at least by me in southern Garrison, came down in less than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that was Irma, right? We're talking
Typically
about
use like a
Irma?
6-inch design storm for most of these. That seems to be, I'm trying to think, I think we did one in Chappaqua not that long ago. I think we used 6-inch design storm, which is, what's the 100-year storm, 7, 8 1/4 now?
Yeah, it's more than that.
So,
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask is, we have asked in the past for on the maintenance agreement, on
Right.
something like this being deeded in.
right.
It's
You
in the
mentioned that
deed,
in the
you know?
previous letter, I believe.
You guys agree?
Do you have a template for a maintenance plan that you'd like us to put together, or should we give you one that we have
We'd love
models
to
from
see
other
one.
towns?
Let's see what, you know.
Yeah, I think if you provide us with one,
Okay.
then we can go back and forth
Sure.
on verbiage.
Yeah.
So we have something similar in the Riverview,
Yeah.
for the oil water separator,
Yeah,
as far as the template goes.
I think you were
I
asked to
technically
provide.
moved that, but I just.
No, I think you were asked to provide one for the oil separator and the restoration plantings, so that should be a note on one of the plans somewhere. But it was, you know, a set of actual, step-by-step, like a maintenance agreement
Yeah.
that we signed off on.
I feel like we asked for that on another one recently also, not Riverview, I feel like it was a pool also. I don't remember what it was. But, okay, if you're
Yeah, I
amenable
mean,
to
we
that,
can put
that'd be
together,
great.
I have
That'd be
you know, I have one that, I'll give you a model of one that we've used, if it
Right.
makes sense. We can work out the details in there, I guess, with staff,
Yeah.
or if that's however you want to process that.
Please.
Okay. We usually do a 5-year plan.
The 5-year plan is great, because you're making sure that the stuff is going to survive the initial period of
Right.
whatever it is. But the deeded thing
It's
is, when you sell
perpetuity.
property in
Right,
20 years,
right.
or
That's
50 or
important.
100 years, it's still in place. We're allowing this thing to be in a buffer where it shouldn't, we really would prefer it not be. So this is something that the next owners have to be aware of. It's not something they sort of hear about maybe through, as soon as they open up the deed, there it is, you know? So,
I guess I have some questions about the original proposal, about, you know, I know it was over the septic, but, so why are we ruling out of the buffer as opposed to putting it now in the buffer? What's the rationale for moving it in the buffer?
I think that's the good question. That's really where when we went and did the site visit, there were really only two possibilities. There was the first one in the front, and then something where you're gonna try to infringe as little as possible. So the one in the front, there were issues that is it a cesspool or septic tank?
That's right, yeah, there's a cesspool
a cesspool, which is already a little bit tenuous of a system in the first place, and it's right in front of the house near that patio, it's in a U shape. So, and then you have setback issues, I guess, so you wind up being corralled into this little spot where it was just, and there are a couple of big trees there too. There was something else in it.
There's gas line, but there's also, and again, so when we did that first scenario, we thought, we frankly built that, we drew those plans based on what we thought was a wetland boundary, and that turned out, after your delineation was done, that was frankly not conservative enough, and your wetland buffer is actually bigger than that.
Right.
So the wetland buffer, we had that pool was somewhere in here, and the wetland, so that would actually
Even
have
that.
been partly in the buffer even then, and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, we've got setbacks, well, this is the property line, and I don't have the yard setbacks on this drawing, but there's not, I don't honestly know that it would be buildable in here. I think it would maybe you could get something there, but I think we've got we've got a yard setback here, and we've got a yard setback there, and I don't know if it's even feasible there, based on where the actual.
The first page of this document, you say it's not buildable?
I think it'd be the same issue, that it would still be in the
This one,
buffer.
I'm saying this one here that says it's out of the buffer. So that's not out of the buffer?
That's based on the original buffer that we had, it was an assumed buffer.
Oh,
It was not on an actual delineated and certified buffer.
so it's not out of the
Mark,
buffer.
I think-
It's not really out of the buffer.
It's really not out of the buffer.
Okay, well, that's important to know,
Yeah.
to understand that it's really not out of the buffer.
Yeah.
'Cause if it's out of the buffer, that's the answer.
No, if you look at the map, Rob, it's not out of the buffer, you know, the original plan at all. I mean, I'm not thrilled about this from a theoretical standpoint, but I think what they're proposing to do in terms of restoring a smaller wetland that's in pretty good shape but won't probably last over time, it's probably a fair trade-off.
You know, my recollection, Andy, was that was the issue that ultimately, and I think Mark made this point when we were on site, really made this a preferred location because of the benefit to the site and the ecosystems of the wetland restoration and remediation,
Right.
which is being accomplished by the work you described.
It's a pretty beefy buffer that
Yeah.
we're putting in there. I mean, it's, you know, they should do it the right way. We don't always
weren't
get
there.
I
customers
wasn't
that
able to go, no.
that approach a project
The
that way.
wetland as restored is failing up at the top, and their remediation, I think we got fairly excited about the possibility, and particularly moving the pool where Mark suggested seemed like the least bad alternative of a lot of constraints in the site that just made it almost impossible to work with.
Yeah, you know, if this building were built today, I don't know that you would, I mean, it came to you, I don't know that you would ever approve that much grass going right up to the edge of a resource.
Truth is, I don't think that building would be built today. You couldn't get a
Right.
septic, it's impossible, you know?
Yeah.
What year was it built? You said 80?
Yeah,
Maybe 83, this one was 83.
So I'm
It's amazing.
surprised that they still have a cesspool, though. or something.
We were surprised too. There is, that cesspool service is just a single bathroom, whereas the rest of the house has been rerouted to a septic system underneath the drive. So that cesspool is a remainder, and we're hesitant to do it necessarily. You know? And frankly, you know, we were looking at the amount of disturbance that would have occurred really just feet outside of the buffer zone, and I don't want to say there's no difference, but you know, that much disturbance, we thought for the cost of that disturbance, we'd rather take that cost and include that in the benefit to the property without, you know, this huge disturbance here in the, you know, outside.
Cesspool and the gas lines and the generator lines and the, yeah.
Can the gist of the conversation when we met you guys was, this board is basically, shouldn't be allowing a pool, period. It's not a necessary structure, so the answer was no. But we went further, we all went further to say, well, what could you offer to make the site better, in fact, than it was before the pool went in, even with the presence of the pool? So it seems that you've done everything that we, and more than we suggested.
And that's where the deeded maintenance agreement is really an important part
Right.
of it.
Right.
In terms of the permanent improvement. of the
Right,
site.
because they're not gonna be there forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do have one other suggestion, thought. The board obviously looks highly upon, if we improve the site, it's a balance. How many bedrooms is the house?
That house is
Three.
it's a 3-bedroom house.
And how many bedrooms is the septic approved for under the driveway?
The septic's approved for, I
4.
want to say 4. And then there's a cesspool, which,
Right. So the volume on the Jason?
Well, technically, the current septic system is a repair,
Right.
and there's no bedroom count associated with repair. It's for whatever whatever the town legal bedroom count is
Right.
currently.
Really, I'm not going there. Where I'm going is, if the cesspool is obviously far inferior to a septic, even if it is just a repair. So if you could divert the cesspool into the septic, that would be, I think, in the eyes of the board, another improvement on the property.
I was thinking along the lines of something with the cesspool to either to the septic or to maybe use a peat system on the cesspool to kind of mitigate the, to give that some kind of
Yeah.
biological processing that it doesn't currently have. I mean, it is a little weird that it has just one bathroom.
it's really strange.
Hopefully.
We were surprised.
Yeah.
We were surprised too. Everything else ties into the new septic except for this. But my assumption is that it was a rise or a run issue with getting, liquid from all the way over from one side of the house all the way over the other side of the property. But
Yeah, I mean, it's easy enough, just 2 seconds. So the amount of effluent, whatever is coming, is it a powder room or a full bathroom?
it's a full bathroom.
So I mean, even if the grade, if you don't have pitch over to some other drain line that goes out to it, you could do a simple pump system just for that one bathroom, which would be a really minimal cost, essentially, in the overall picture. A peat system is fantastic, but it's not minimal cost. I'm just throwing it out there as you guys, I'm saying you, as far as I'm concerned, you did everything and more of what we asked.
Well, we're in the world of while we have the body open, So I mean, we would certainly go that far if that were.
Where is the septic system on that?
It's under the patio in the house.
The cesspool is under the back patio on the
kinda
west side
right
within the kind of
Yeah,
the
the
horseshoe shape.
cesspool I get,
And
but
the septic is actually
system-
under the driveway. You should, I think, the
Under the
leaching,
gravel driveway?
Yeah.
Right here.
and that's design, I mean, that was a modern design, right? It's H20 loading or whatever. But there was some issue with pumping, wasn't there? Wasn't there some,
Well, there's a
There's an
because
issue
we
with
asked the same
fields
question.
under a driveway too.
Yeah.
there's a few things. Number one, I don't like to, that's a good idea with the, like a E1 pump grinder outside. I don't like to pump to a septic tank because then you lose the acquiescence, it stirs it up.
If you pump directly
If you
into the tank.
correct.
That's actually not what I'm suggesting. A simple pump system where you put a pot in the ground right underneath in the bathroom, and you pump from there into an existing line that runs out to the septic. You're just tying into one of the internal drain pipes in the house. That's it.
You're cutting off the cesspool, I guess, right?
Yeah, take the drain line that comes out of that bathroom, which, is it on a slab or is it accessible from the basement?
It is accessible from, there's a crawl space.
So
Yeah,
you cut the
yeah,
pipe
it's
off, you
possible.
cap it,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
cesspool
right.
is eliminated, you take that pipe and you connect it into the septic tank. No.
Assuming that we can get gravity to.
Exactly, and if you can't, that's my point. If you
Okay.
can't get gravity, then you run it into what do you call it? And they make a little box that you can put under your sink in your kitchen. And it's just a little pump. It's the same thing, it's just this big. And it,
Oh, okay, I got it. So it would pump, so like an injector pump?
Yeah, an ejector
Oh,
pump. That's
okay.
the word I'm looking for. Thank you.
Alright.
Just a simple
So you're
ejector.
saying inside up to the house drain,
Yeah,
it's gonna go, I
that's
got
all.
you, I got you now.
It doesn't
Okay.
affect the whole system at all.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
getting that stuff out of the ground. Because a cesspool is basically a hole in the ground. I mean, that's all it is. It doesn't have any kind of separation at the septic tank, nothing. I mean, you'd have to pump that thing out every 6 months
And it's
and
right
more,
next to the
probably.
house.
Sorry.
And it's right next to the
And
house.
it's right next to the
so it's-
house.
Right.
So also, in addition to all the other enhancements, I don't think we really discussed this, but we're also going to be infiltrating the existing
Right.
roof leader footing drains from the
Fantastic.
existing house into,
Dry wells.
into some type of infiltration system, so.
That's great.
That's it, because right now they just discharge right onto the ground. I don't know if you saw it or not, but
Right. Onto,
So
across
that's
the
another-
grass, picking up nutrients.
that's
right
another
down to-
benefit that would help tremendously, so.
Agreed.
So I guess I don't know which direction the fields run from, so it's, I know the septic's under the, they go
run-
this way,
They
this
run
way?
like this.
So
So
the-
here's the cover for the
Mhm.
septic tank.
Yep, I see
And then
that.
and then there's a drop boxes like that, so they run parallel to this, stone edging.
Mhm.
It's on one of the,
Well, the septic is on this.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's on our site plan, the most recent
Okay.
version. And you can see the tank and like a galley system?
they are, the, tri-galleys.
Okay.
Tri-gallery, yeah.
Infiltrators, yeah. Max, I'm really curious to hear what you have. Thoughts are.
No, I'm just writing down all of, I mean, it's just like a laundry list of things. If we're gonna start looking at a conditional permit, that's something that you guys are considering. So I just wanted to make sure that I had everything written down.
I'm just wondering about, kind of this septic system being so close to the buffer, if there's anything, if we should, consider a peat system for something like that as well. I mean, again, that seems to be what we've recommended when these things are close, when there's a repair. I know this is not a repair on the septic, so it's a little bit different. But it does sound like it was already repaired, and we do have the cesspool issue, and so I'm just wondering if maybe some type of remediation with like a peat system on the main septic system might be useful here, since it's so close to this wetland buffer.
Right.
Well, the system should be outside of the.
It is, I guess it is, right? It is outside the
It's
buffer?
out, yeah.
It is outside the buffer.
I mean, my feeling is that if the septic is actually working, I mean, you know what I'm thinking about immediately. I'm thinking about Swanson. The whole idea that you can't take it, just because it's an existing septic and it's been approved and blah, 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 doesn't mean you can necessarily accept it as working. But if this is a good system, it seems like. 7 infiltrators,
That's a new system, isn't it? When did you do that?
and how big,
The previous owners installed.
how big is the septic tank? I can't read it. 1250?
It's not labeled on this.
I mean, a dye test, a simple dye test, prove that the septic is working at maximum capacity, to address, because Bob's concerned, clearly, that we're dealing with this issue of these old septics that were built in the 50s, and it was a pile of bricks, and the water just went out the bottom, it was ridiculous,
No,
so.
I was there with it. I mean, it's all new, steel,
Perfect.
reinforced concrete. We did dye tests, of course, when we purchased the house. So I
Right.
watched the company dig it out there. It's all new concrete boxes.
Oh, when you bought the house, they put it in right before you bought the house?
Several years before we bought the house.
Okay.
There were 2 prior owners, and the owners that we purchased the house from did extensive work to the house and property, and this was one of them.
They did the septic.
My assumption is that it was a repair, so they rerouted away from the cesspool
Right.
to this new system.
I mean, we can do a dye test, we can look at we can do the dye test, look at the slope, look at anything in the driveway, look at the lake, make sure there's nothing,
Right.
it's all right there, so we can.
I mean,
It wouldn't hurt. I just also wonder if in the requirements that we put some type of requirement about a periodic pumping, just to, not overtax it, because, people forget about that and, don't do it every 2 or 3 years,
I know MJ would have something to say about this. She would be adamant that we should not be permitting this at all, I think. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she has been pretty vocal about precedent. So I don't know how the rest of you guys feel, but I feel like if we're gonna set a precedent, we have piled enough requirements on this one that it's gonna be a hard act to follow for somebody to just expect us to approve a pool in a buffer. So, I don't know, how do you guys all feel about this?
Crystal weren't able to join tonight?
We got no word. I don't know why she's not here.
I think under these circumstances and looking at the site, I was initially very negative for all the reasons we previously discussed. I think this one is unique enough and the restoration is important enough that I think it makes sense and will enhance the property and the habitat significantly.
Thanks.
And I thought the deeded maintenance agreement is what may be the single most important part of it. Not only is it being done, but it's required in perpetuity,
Right.
which I think increasingly, rather than being a detriment for property values and resale, I think will be an enhancement.
I think that the other key point I think we have to make somehow is that saying that it's a 2-to-1 ratio, it's not, I mean, the next person walks in here and says we're doing a 2-to-1 ratio, you let the last guys go through, so why can't we go through? It's the combination of everything you've offered, which has been, you know, it's across the board. So I want that to be on the record. This is,
Yeah, I think it's more, not necessarily the ratio, it's more the capability that the restoration is offering in this particular case, you know. I mean,
In unique
it's
circumstances.
a unique circumstance, so there's more of like, I guess, wetland capability that's being added here that's kind of mitigating, you know, kind of the damage to the one area that's closest to that buffer. So you are adding wetlands capability by adding this natural buffer. So it's not necessarily the amount of land or the 2-to-1 ratio.
Exactly.
At least that's what I'm thinking.
And Mark, to your point about this can't be cited, there's a concept in law where a court is making a ruling that is the right ruling under the unique circumstances, but the court doesn't ever want anybody to say, well, look what you ruled here. And so at the bottom of the opinion, they'll put a phrase that says, this ruling has no precedential value whatsoever and may never be cited as evidence of the court doing X. And that's sort of what we're doing here.
So you heard the lawyer. We'll put that on the deed.
all right, well, there you have it.
All right.
Anybody?
But, I mean, are we talking about that you're agreeing to do the pumping of the cesspool, or, you know, kind of closing that up and?
Yeah, well, I will certainly agree to pump it, that's just good ownership, and then it sounds like we should probably look into rerouting to the main system anyway.
It really is, it's a whole lot of nothing. I mean, the system itself, the sewage ejector is probably a $1,500 thing.
We did that once on a prior house that had these same facts. There was a very old part, the original part of the house had a cesspit. We put in a septic system and then ended up running the drain pipe from the oldest bathroom, just like you suggested, Mark. And it was tremendously better to get rid of the cesspit altogether.
We don't like it, it's
This has been an internal conversation with our team.
I apologize.
Here, we've talked about this cesspool a lot, about how to fix this. so.
How often do you have to pump the cesspool?
I mean, every 2 years.
Every 2 years. I mean, and how often do you have to typically have
I don't
to?
know if we should be pumping it more.
Probably more, honestly. And all I was going to say was that you're probably going to save money in the pumping of the cesspool because the septic system will go longer between pumping, so.
Well, I mean, my understanding is a septic system is every 2 to 3 years,
Right.
you know, especially in an environmentally sensitive area like this, you know, that's kind of like what we used to talk with Mike about, trying to get some type of guidance for around the lake communities. But
That should be in your comments.
probably have to get back to.
But it's
So-
pumping one system instead of two, so there's a savings right
There you
there.
go, there's savings
Well,
right
and
there.
that's, right there, that's,
And rerouting through crawl spaces is probably $2
Easy. So as always, we talk about 10,000 different things. So Max, you want to just quick run?
Yeah, I guess I think at this point we could vote on a conditional permit, and I just want to run through all the conditions, I guess, and make sure that you guys have them down on record. I don't know if this was discussed necessarily with the board, but in terms of a construction narrative, I think that's really important to include on this plan, especially regarding delineating the limits of disturbance for the pool. And then, you know, wherever silt fence is going to be installed, that needs to be shown on a plan. And then essentially that should be wire back silt fence. And that also, that construction narrative should include the discussion you had about, you know, trucks entering in and out of the site and using this lane here, or however they're going to pick their way through. And in my opinion, you know, approaching the building of the pool and installing the overflow areas and all of that in such a manner that essentially during that construction phase, you're limiting impact to almost nothing, like as light as possible. And then in the future, beyond the restoration, the infiltration basins and the overflow and all of that should essentially be designed to the point where it could never potentially impact. In a perfect world, it can never potentially impact the regulated areas. I'd also like to see a construction narrative for the restoration portion of the project in regards to how those areas are going to be planted. You know, methodologies, machinery, like all of that. Deer fencing should be shown or included. I think we also discussed about showing 2 different infiltration areas, one for stormwater and I guess the leaders off the house, and then anything in a separate storm area for any sort of overflow.
So do you want to do
dedicated strictly to the pool?
So do you want to do like maybe we do the terraces and the downspouts into into an infiltration area than the pool, because if there's water overflowing from the pool, it's going to have, you know, it's a salt system, so that should go in separate one. Yes?
And the capacity for you
that-
to be able to pump the thing out, say, we know this hurricane is coming in, you're gonna get 10 inches of rain, so you preemptively pump it down, you want a completely empty tank to pump it into, dry well to pump it into. Yes, sir?
So I want to get these systems straightened out.
You know what, Jace, we're gonna do this. We're gonna write this list down and we're gonna send it out, and we'll have another conversation after this meeting to make sure we're right, but please, go ahead.
Okay. We got the regular stormwater overflow,
Which is shown here,
associated
right?
with the pool, and then we got the yearly drawdown. Is that going to be the same?
In my mind,
Seasonal drawdown.
I'm thinking the impervious areas and the roof and the terraces, et cetera, that's what you're capturing in the primary infiltration system, correct?
Right.
Correct.
So in addition to that, you're because of what you said before, because the pool itself is considered impervious because even though it's water, in addition to that system, if you wanted to back out the impervious areas of just the pool top, the water surface itself, and build a separate system for that, which is going to have enough capacity for the standard, like a rain event off the top of the pool, and that goes into this, plus whatever you would need to do to pump into this separate thing. It's probably going to amount to the same volume. The second system is really there just to prevent you from having to pump the chlorinated water into the other infiltration system.
Okay.
That's all.
So there's 2 systems. There's a true clean stormwater, if you will, terrace and roof, and then there's the pool, overflow, and drawdown chambers.
And
Okay.
I think to add on to that point, you mentioned something about an off-gassing process. And is that something that you would want to see done here on an annual basis?
I think it's
Sit for a
probably just
week, or
common
you could
sense.
check with the pool people how long it takes for that to dissipate and then let it sit for a week and
We
then
used
pump.
to call it 24 hours. We would chlorinate I'm talking 30 years ago, we'd chlorinate the pool, and in 24 hours, the chlorine level had dropped so much,
Huh.
you had to re-chlorinate.
Okay.
The sunlight just kills it. So
Right.
I don't know, that's
And that's in reference to just when they discharge.
correct,
essentially.
just when they're
Yeah.
intentionally, you're
Right.
at the end of the year, you're doing it, so you're gonna do a degassing period, and then you're gonna drain it down.
Okay. We can look into that. I don't know the answer to that, but that's worth looking into.
Okay. Then obviously a major point here was some sort of bond and deeded maintenance agreement for the restoration areas. And then I would suggest to the board that there's a 95% survival rate annually for 5 years for the plantings, which is pretty standard. And then that your firm or someone's firm submits a survival report, essentially.
Annual
And then
report.
Yeah, an annual report for 5 years to the building department. Let's see, what else? And then obviously this is something that I guess the board should weigh in on, is before construction begins, or, does it coincide with construction? Removing the connections to the cesspit, proving that that's the case to us, and then putting in that pump system to the septic area, the currently functioning septic area, that's of a higher standard. How would the board like to see that submitted? Would that be?
Yeah, I think that's something that,
Should that
in the
happen?
check-ins with you, that can be verified.
Okay.
Because, I mean, again, if we find out that the septic's not working, then there's another issue, right, because it's so close to the wetlands.
Yeah.
So maybe
It's not in the wetlands, but it's,
let's look at that in the construction sequence. Maybe that's early on, and then we, just so that it's written down and there's some sort of assurance.
Okay.
So in the construction narrative, maybe that's your point that's the absolute first thing. Dye test, once we know the septic is okay, then we move
Right.
down the list.
Right. So yeah, that was the next point, was a dye test, and then just sending those results in, and then that can lead to the next cascading sequence of everything.
The construction sequence is gonna be interesting when you talk to your contractor about what he's gonna wanna do concurrently. He's got certain machines on site, he's gonna wanna be, so you need to speak to your contractor and see what works for him. Don't try to jam yourself in the corner, Well, what do you think, kiddies? So can I have a motion to approve a
So moved.
additional permit? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
There you have it.
All right. Thank you very much.
So I'll be in contact with
Yeah,
you
we're gonna
all.
be busy.
Yeah, and then when we do finalize all these plans, if you could submit 3 hard copies to the building department and then digital copies to Cheryl, so
Sure.
they can submit it to the board.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Max will send you a list of that list.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll bounce you one that we used in Newcastle, which I think is a pretty good maintenance plan.
Yep.
Just to get the dialogue started.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
All right, that's that one. Who's asked not to come in? Yi, is there a representative from Yi? Dana, would you like to say hi?
Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Dana Raymond, applicant for Hudson. Yep. We're here to ask the board to make an amendment to our permit that was granted in October, I believe, for our new construction. Our house is in 2 parts. It's physically 2 separate structures. And once the larger house is to the north and the smaller portion is to the south.
I'm sorry, what property is this?
Hudson River Lane.
Oh, okay, 'cause I heard you call Yi, so I was thinking of.
Oh, no, I said, there was no representative.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes, I'm
completely lost-
sorry, I should have said,
I was
it's
like, 2 houses,
formerly
wait a second.
246 Hudson River Lane. We merged the lots,
When did
so now
that
it's
happen?
2.
This is down Hudson River Lane. And just to refresh my memory, this is the first peat system we approved. is that
Yes,
correct?
yes. And John knows that when he's installing it, you had requested to come down and take a look.
Yeah,
We all
please.
want to see
Thank
it. Yeah. So what had happened is we started excavation in March, and we're not much further along because we hit so much bedrock. So much so that it was so close to the elevation of the land that we had to raise the house another foot just to get a functional crawl space. For the mechanicals, blasting was really out of the question, and they broke a few jackhammers trying to break it up where they needed to get a basement stair in. And even though we did the borings and we had our civil and our structural engineer and our architect and our geotechnical telling us, you'll have an ample basement, we're pretty sure of it, we lost 70% of our basement. And we need it for many reasons. We need it for the mechanicals, we need it for our own personal use, we need it for the RO system because the water's so terrible down there. So we looked once the footings were around the smaller portion of the house, we all looked at each other and said, let's pause and let's see if we can apply for a variance to encroach on the existing setback of 30 feet by 10 feet. So last night we presented to the zoning board and they granted us our variance pending our review with you this evening. And we feel, now that we see the kind of the flow of the bedrock, that we have a better chance of having some basement if we move the smaller portion of the house to the south. So that's why we're coming here tonight, to ask you if you would consider amending the existing permit for us from a 30-foot side yard setback to a 20.
Can you point out on the map, on the site plan, where the shift is? Because I couldn't figure it out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was not true.
Sure.
Are you taking this and moving it that way?
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. It's the larger portion of the house we are not moving.
Right,
Right.
In fact, that foundation is in.
got it.
It's the little baby here.
A little
That's
shed.
890 square
Okay,
feet.
so
What
it's
is
the
that?
shed. Okay.
It's a studio building. Yeah,
It's on full foundation?
it's on full, it will be on full foundation.
No
we have
bathroom in
that
there or anything?
There's one bathroom.
There is a bed, and that's connected back to the existing septic, or back to the main septic system,
Yes.
no?
Was that a separate package?
No, it was in the original.
This one?
So I guess really our question is there any change in the impact of what you're proposing to build related to, or compared to what we already approved? The environmental
None
impact?
that we see and none that our civil engineer sees. I believe in the application is his letter stating as such.
Right.
We're not shifting closer to the river. We're not
That's what I wanted you to
shifting
understand.
towards the wetlands, even though we have our buffer of the train. We're just shifting south.
So just refresh my memory, I don't remember a studio building. It was originally a studio building.
It always was there.
Okay.
So it's
I'm
being
sorry, on the
moved,
map, which way is south?
it's basically being moved parallel to the road, not going any closer to the road, so I don't think it makes any difference really to our previous.
Shifting to this.
Yeah, this is our neighbor. This is our setback
Yeah, I don't
here.
think it makes
Instead
a
of
difference.
east-west, it's
And
going
we're
north-south.
shifting it
So,
this way.
exactly.
You can see it on the second page. You should have the
Oh,
second page.
right.
Right?
And this is the proposed building?
This is what was approved by the Conservation Board and for our building permit. So the studio building sits right on the setback. What we're proposing now is to shift it this way, which you see right here, by 10 feet. And our neighbors didn't object, and we're pending approval from the zoning board.
Let me ask one stupid question. You just said that the studio is sitting right on top of the septic?
No.
What, where, I-
Bedrock.
Setback.
Setback.
Setback. Oh,
Definitely,
it's,
that's
yeah,
right.
there's less, there's
It's on
less.
top of the septic? Like,
No, my gosh. No, and it's, there's less bedrock over by the smaller portion of the
Got it.
house.
got it. I mean, I don't know, yeah. In my opinion, it feels to me like you're not changing anything, moving it sideways relative to the river. There's
That's what we're
no
doing,
impact.
yes.
I agree. So but the buffer's not impacted. I'm just trying to catch up as to
Yeah, sure.
what you're doing here. So you're moving it over here. So the zoning board was really the main hurdle, right? Because of the 30-foot setbacks.
Yes, and, you know, we were only, we would have had a 20-foot setback, no problem, because we were, let me restate that. If you're over 40,000 square feet, you have to have a 30-foot side yard setback in our zone. We aren't unless you count the beach area, which is the portion that's in the flood zone. So it was determined we had to shift to 30-foot setback. But, you know, we're really close anyway, and so we're taking a gamble, but we feel we're in really good hands, and everyone feels that we're able to do this, the builder and John, our civil engineer.
I think, I mean, I see no issue with it. The other thing, just interested, complete side point, you're raising the house another, how much?
Foot.
A foot.
Yeah.
So that's, again, we very often will suggest you should really get your house out of the flood zone. It's gonna get flooded, just for your own benefit, get it up. So you've lifted it another foot, so you've gone in a good direction.
Yeah, you know, we're not in the flood zone up there, and it's so interesting when you look at the FEMA map, because it's a little deceptive, and it looks as if all the houses on the lane are in the flood zone, but actually, the majority of the houses are out of the flood zone. The first group of houses, because the elevation of the land is higher.
Yeah.
And then you dip down,
Right.
and then you have
That little
trouble.
knoll, right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then can I have a motion to
So move.
approve? All in favor of approving the permit? Continuation?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll send you the permit and then we'll correspond with the ZBA to let them know.
That's great. Thank you
Good
very
luck.
much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time.
Thank you.
See you, I'll
Thank
see
you.
you
Bye.
kayaking by. one of these-
Yeah, I can't wait, I gotta come down and see it.
You know, we miss being there so much, you know.
I'm paddling a year and a half, since the beginning of this stupid thing.
Really?
It's ridiculous. I'll be down. I'll be waving at you. See
Thank you, have a good evening.
you. Haddad? Betsy? How are you?
How we doing? How are you?
Can you hear that okay with the
I'm
mask?
okay. Is that okay with the mask? Yes, you can hear. All right, thank you. I appreciate it. I get a little closer. I was told the same thing last time when I was wearing a mask on my other meetings.
I can hear you
So I
fine.
apologize.
No worries.
So it's been a while since actually we were in front of you guys. It was early in the year. I'm not sure if you guys have a recollection on that one. So I kind of brought a map from the original ask that we were here in front of you guys. That's actually not part of your presentation package. I apologize. When I was printing out the drawings early today, I figured out to add something for you guys to react to what we actually are proposing. So I apologize for that. So this first map shows the previous proposal, which you guys can compare that. What are we asking right now? So the yellow areas are pretty much what we are proposing now on the highlighted part.
Did you show the first map again?
Sure, yes. So the biggest change, and we took the suggestion that you guys made, is the rear addition that we were doing. We took that off. We're not doing that anymore. The only thing that we are doing in our rear is the balcony that is going to be extruded from, is going to be a cantilever balcony from the first floor itself. So that's why that yellow portion is still as part of our design. But everything else on this one, it was proposed. We have, this yellow part is existing, so we're just removing that and we're creating an outdoor space in that portion. We are extending on the front as was part of suggestion from the board members. And that is showing into the map itself. We're kind of squaring that off on the front of the house to give a little bit of the room that we're taking it away from the master bedroom in a way. So we minimize the impact on the house itself. The only difference right now is you can see on the yellow part here, and this is an obstruction of a balcony as well, with a spiral staircase connecting the first floor with the ground floor. And we already have an existing patio in there. So the disturbance itself, the only disturbance will be the connection of the spiral staircase to that existing patio on that area. May I keep moving?
That's a bluestone patio on a concrete slab?
It's correct, yes. I attached some pictures in there as well. I'm sure if you can see
Okay.
that. I do have the pictures in here so you can see that as well. So that's this part here and this part here. So we are thinking of removing the existing the fireplace itself to make room for the balcony on the first floor.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the original plan called for an addition, so increasing the footprint. This plan, how much of the, are you
So we are
increasing?
reducing from the first ask, we are taking away about 200 square feet.
Let me just ask, how much additional footprint are you proposing in this one?
On this one is about 300 square feet.
300 square feet?
Yes.
And that's, which area is that's this right here, correct?
That will be this right here,
right.
yes.
Yep. Okay. Anybody have any questions about it? I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a site visit.
I was
And if
gonna-
you could meet
sure.
us out there and just show us exactly what it is, we'll get a better sense of it, but at this point, any questions to,
No, I think we need to do a site
Right.
visit, because, you know, my gut impression is I'm still uncomfortable expanding the footprint of the house of where it is, but I think,
Right.
you know, seeing it might,
Andy, I went out to the site and I suggested that they come back before the board, because I think when you go out there, you can really get a look at the topography of the site. And I wouldn't have asked you to do that,
Right.
without,
Yeah.
you know, you all understanding that and you understanding that, so I was hoping that you guys would
I'm
visit.
fine with that.
it's worth a look, for sure, for sure.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
do
so-
appreciate, yes, definitely. And that was something that, you know, after a couple months of rethinking the process and everything else, that's something that, you know, we felt that it would be appropriate for what we asked. Again, making that a little bit of an addition change on the front, it was one of the suggestions that was made by the board, and we took that further to a different, you know, to enhance the portion of what we are trying to accomplish. But yes, so the site visit, will that coordinate with you, Max, or with the board members?
Yeah, Cheryl and I. We can-
Okay.
We'll figure, if you can just email Cheryl and I, and then we
Yep,
can figure out.
no
getting
problem.
the board out there.
I can do that.
Yeah, and then we discussed having you stake out all the
Yes,
actual
yes.
changes to.
Yeah,
the-
we'll do
Yeah.
all that stuff. We'll stake that stuff out for you guys to visualize that, yes.
Good, very good.
Okay. All right.
All right.
I appreciate your time.
Okay.
Thank you
very
so much.
Thank you. Just a little, we're thinking of not having an August meeting. None of the other boards are having a meeting in August. What's your feeling, guys? So Cheryl, we won't have a meeting in August either. Do you want to mention anything about Cloud Bank?
Yeah, I guess I can. We had you guys are all apprised of the situation. They didn't breach the clay again, but they've restarted work. We've put in a lot of safety measures, quote unquote, and they're now, they sent us the turbidity readings and all those things. So they're going to be continuously monitoring the site. Again, I'm pretty wary of everything that's going on up there, so we've been trying to keep pretty close tabs on everything. So we'll see what happens. The water levels right now are so low.
Really?
Yeah, well, maybe not, since I visited, maybe not last week at this point. So it may be worth me going up there in the next couple of days.
In the last, not even 21 days, by my calculations, we've had over 80.
Yeah, I'll go back up there and take a look. Yeah, other than that, we've been getting, they've been taking their baseline readings, and so we're supposed to be getting weekly updates on that.
Will we get that data?
Yeah, I have it. I believe she sent it to Cheryl, Mark, and I can forward that to you all. Obviously, that's just the baseline information, so we have nothing to compare it to yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see,
Yeah.
See what kind of data they're getting there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's, do you know the test method, but that they're using?
I think that initially they took water samples for the baseline and sent them to a lab, and then they bought a handheld, like a meter, essentially, that has, a glass bulb on it that they can dip into the water in locations to take,
Compared to what the lab has, so that they can kind of
that's,
baseline it?
I mean, logically, yeah, that's what I'd be
Okay.
doing. I'm not sure if that's gonna happen,
Okay.
so
Well,
I have to look.
Suggest that.
Yeah.
Because that will help a lot if we have something, compared to the lab, then we
Yeah.
can know, like, it's 2% off or whatever.
Yeah.
Handheld, not sure about.
Yeah, I honestly just feel like this has become such a hard lesson for us here. I don't know if I don't think I would go through with this type of dredging method again, because it just seemed like, I don't know.
Well, the problem is, because when I was reading the minutes,
Yeah.
when it dawned on me and sort of
retrospect is, it's still mechanical dredging when you're doing siphon dredging.
Yeah, really the benefit is just to the property owner so that they don't have to lower the water. And so,
You don't need large, big machinery, yeah.
So I don't know. I felt like every other project where we've approved something like this, we've been able to really isolate the site.
Yeah.
And that's been the key. And this was like a huge error.
Wouldn't the other benefit though just be that, you know, like if you do disturb it, I mean, it is still a mechanical process, but if you do disturb it, it's siphoning it up, so like, it's more likely to like, any particles that it release, instead of it making a plume, wouldn't it just suck it up?
Yeah.
Well, in theory, but the advantage for siphon dredging is theoretically you're doing less damage to the bottom of a pond. But if you really think about it, it's usually done when a pond is eutropifying. So essentially, there's little of value in the bottom of the pond in terms of most flora. It's just basically the fauna, the animals and the microbes and what have you, the plankton that's there.
I mean, the other issue with that system that they put in place that I see is there's really no assurances that if it failed, like it failed, and then they just were dumping. They were just dumping, pumping that water back into the pond with no real oversight, I guess, at that point. So.
Yeah, and our other learning was to realize, to really ask them, what are they doing? Because originally it was supposed to just be a dam repair.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it morphed from there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the way that the project was pitched to us, I guess, or to the board, was that the real immediacy with which we needed to approve the permit was for dam safety.
Yep.
And there were lines in that permit application regarding, working in the rest of the pond, but, I don't know, I felt like we had the board had every right to just stop work, and that would be the end of the project, so. But I guess we'll give them another shot.
All right,
But I
well,
mean, in the end, removing the sediment is also of value too, I mean, for the long run though, I mean.
I don't know. I'd have to really look at I think that they had been studying the pond for a long time and had a lot of a limnologist look at it in a really scientific light.
Which I don't think was done. I mean, they didn't have any limnology reports.
I think it was I think it was from Beth Evans's consulting firm, but it was nothing more than maybe general recommendations
Right.
based on her experiences on the property.
all right, well, Max will
Yeah.
let us know what it looks like when you get up there. I could certainly join you. I would like to join you. This conversation
Yeah.
for another time.
Yeah, in fact, let me know, I'd like to go.
Yeah. Did everybody have a chance to look at the June minutes by any chance? Sounds like,
Yep.
can I have a motion to approve the June minutes?
I'll make a motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There you have it. All right, I think we have had enough, so can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And do I see a second, Mr. Lou?
Who's second?
Thank you. All in favor? Good night, all.
You know, I'm
Thank
on
you.
multi-hour stormwater.